and welcome to this conversation just on the eve of budget reading for the financial year 2024-2025. And like any other good house, we have to plan ourselves as a country. We have to look, where are we going to get the money? Because we've created a budget on how we will spend. This money will go to this particular ministry, will go to this particular office. Well and good. But the question is, how are we raising money in a proper manner and in a way that is not punitive to the general populace? As the conversation we're having tonight, and I'm joined by Sandeep, my partner, tax and head of KPMG Private Enterprise. Thank you very much, Sandeep, for making time.
Yeah, good to be here, Noah.
All right. For starters, I think since we've reached the eve of this particular budget, the finance bill has been top of mind for many Kenyans. And the biggest conversation we've had, honestly, it's been touching on matters to do with bread, because you consume bread so much, and the issues touching on motor vehicle tax, because being told I own a motor vehicle, now you want me to pay tax on that. Yep. What will that do? Maybe it will open a door to many other things. Maybe I have a television, I'll need to pay tax for owning one. But that aside, for starters, this finance bill 2024 has quite a number of issues underlying that are very critical and we're not talking about. For starters, just to get this off, I know on matters investment, we are very sensitive. When you look at matters raising revenue, the government, a lot of us invest on matters treasury bills, treasury bonds. And this is how government raises revenue. But this bill has a proposition that we have to introduce a withholding tax. Talk to me about how do you process this and come up with such a suggestion?
Well, no, I think it's very interesting that you bring that up. So historically, the infrastructure bonds, the government bonds, the green bonds, are meant to be tax-free to then actually entice someone, motivate someone to actually make that investment. And I think the minimum was about 100,000 Kenya shillings, all the way to whatever you can really afford. And it was about investing with the government. So this is how the government actually does local borrowing through such bonds. Now, if this proposal comes through as is in terms of the withholding tax, that is going to then probably disincentivize me to then invest with the government, which is again, well, we say it's a low risk, but given how things are looking, would I be safer putting my money with a bank, which would still withhold tax? So I'm hoping, and I'm really hoping that, before the act, before the president actually executes the bill into an act, this one would actually be dropped because it is one of the key sources of the government's revenue from a local borrowing perspective.
Definitely. And even I see here, we have quite a deficit, which we'll touch on, close to 514.7 billion. And domestic financing will have 257 billion going towards that. External borrowing, 256. These are normally the numbers, but the reality on the ground, once we start rolling into the financial year, it normally changes. And most of the time, it twists towards external borrowing. Maybe for starters, even before we go into that, I wanted to raise another issue quickly. Okay. One of the issues that we haven't actually paid close attention, and it's very sensitive, this issue of reimbursement. Sandeep, it's something that you've raised concern. We're just chatting here and you're saying, why is nobody talking about reimbursement and some of the proposition in that regard? What is in the finance bill on matters reimbursement, and how huge a loophole is it?
So, Noah, this is not a very new provision. I must say it was there last year. And the provision essentially gives public officers, which to my understanding is not defined, a right to own or to buy an asset irrespective of the ownership, and I must repeat, irrespective of the ownership of that particular asset, as long as it's being used for the furtherance of their duties. So this means that any public officer, if this goes through as is, any public officer would then be able to buy an asset. It could be a house, land, a car. I don't know. It's up to you to what you think that asset could be, and put it in their personal names but then seek a reimbursement from the government for this particular asset. Possibly there would be some guidelines around that, but I always say, why bring in something to disrupt a perfectly good system? Remember, we talked about the biggest issue is really around expenditure. If we can actually manage our expenditure, maybe we'll be able to manage what we need to actually collect. This, for me, is a considerable issue in terms of increasing in expenditure as opposed to saying, how do we tighten our belt?
Okay.
So if this goes through, Noah, I think it's going to be possibly open to a lot of other administrative issues.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It has so much potential for abuse if it goes through, definitely.
Yeah.
And talking about the balances now, budget 2024-2025, expenditure, and even before we start on expenditure, I mean, the finance bill is meant to give a plan on how we can raise revenue. And looking at the outline, it seems the government is very bullish in this particular issue and very positive that we're gonna raise a total revenue of close to 2.19 trillion shillings. That is in ordinary revenue. This has been, of course, broken down into income tax, value-added tax, excise duty tax, import duty, investment income. All this. Going by history and looking at how Kenya Revenue Authority has performed in regards to raising this ordinary revenue, 2.19 trillion shillings, is it achievable?
I think it's going to be a tall order for the Revenue Authority. Just recently, they did not meet their target, but the year before, they did pretty well. I think Revenue Authority is really using a lot of technology and data to then see instances of loopholes or non-compliance and follow up with the respected taxpayers. But for me, personally, I think if we implement ETMS, the Electronic Tax Invoice Management System, to the full, remember the uptake, I think as of last month was very minimum. What is ETMS? ETMS is not to tax, is not a tax and is not to really focus on the large or existing taxpayers that are already registered with KRA, but to really get into the informal sector. No, I've been doing this for a decade now, and every time we have this discussion on how do we tax the informal sector, ETMS is our solution. What is ETMS? It simply means if I'm trading with you and assume I'm a small enterprise, but you are a big manufacturer or a big company and I have to trade with you. We have been trading for maybe a year, I'm your supplier, but with ETMS now you'll require me to issue an electronic invoice to you for you to claim it in your corporate income tax. That was never the case before. If I do not give you that particular invoice, you pay the tax on my behalf, even if I'm on a cash basis business. So for me, I think ETMS is really to regularize. It's data that the Revenue Authority and the government are collecting on taxpayers. They might not have an immediate impact in revenue collections, but I do see if implemented properly, and it can only be done together with other taxpayers, because as a manufacturing entity, you must have, say for example, as a manufacturer, you must have the intention to help net in so that, and remember, if you expand the tax base, and this is where I'm going with this conversation, possibly the rates could also go down. So currently my payee rate at 35%, corporation tax at 30% could potentially come down, which was actually envisaged in the medium-term revenue strategy document. So that can only happen if you have a wide enough tax base to tax. So to answer your question simply, it is possible through technology, through expansion of the tax base.
But always when we try, because I mean, when it comes to taxing Kenya, it is quite imbalanced. We always look at the few who are in the system. And for the longest time, we've taxed these few. And when there is a level of movement to try and expand that tax base, either it is not being done in a right manner. You say ETMS is the silver bullet to this. But why does it face so much resistance most of the times? Is it reflective of the wider economic situation that the country is in, that even people in the informal sector, they feel quite uncomfortable to sort of contribute to this, what you call the national cake?
So no, I mean, looking at it simply, if you go to a consultant and you pay, for example, come to KPMG and you pay me for my fee note, it's for services I've delivered to you. you must be happy with the services I've delivered in order for you to pay my fee note. Now, let's use that analogy for tax. I'm contributing to the tax kitty. It's mandatory. It's not like it's an option if I'm a business and I'm trading, but I would expect a service in return. Can I get the infrastructure I need? Can I get good hospitals? Can I get, possibly free schools, good quality free schools? All those things, amenities, infrastructure, would then, if they're there, I don't think anyone would have a problem in paying the right amount of tax.
Okay.
Yeah.
Definitely. So there should be sort of the goodwill from the government to demonstrate that you are diligent with the resources. But we heard from one of the top government officials saying, actually, it is the right of the government to collect taxes, and that's where we are. So we've looked at this issue of raising revenue. But that question about expenditure comes in because we are always planning for more and planning with more in mind, more than we can collect. We are essentially not living within budget. Now, the issue of you having a budget that is way beyond what you can collect is something that has been normalized across the world. Deficits are there. Yeah. Looking at the current expenditure being projected for the financial year 2024-2025, the executive is projected to get 2.24 trillion shillings. Consolidated fund, which is a big one, 2 trillion shillings. This is quite heavy because it drops in the discussion of debt as a country, national debt. Talk to me, 2 trillion shillings going to consolidated fund. Is that a red flag or is it proper allocation of resources?
That's a really interesting question. So, and I'm going to take you back to the basics of budgeting. How a budget is done is really based on your previous year's actuals. So if the government, and this is for now for 2023, if they did a top line of X amount and they had expenditure of X amount and they had a deficit, now they have to prorate that. So into the 2024-2025 budget, I think the question that we should be asking is the integrity of that particular budget. How authentic is the actual amount that we put through? So the accountability element becomes very critical. It's fine, 2.3 trillion shillings, but what is it for? That information, I think, it's critical to share with the wider stakeholders. And if once we understand that, of course, any excessive expenditure right now is a red flag. I mean, we've just red flagged the expectations from a revenue authority collection perspective. Is it doable, really, to jump from, I think they possibly closed, about 2.2 trillion to now jump to a 2.9 trillion. It's astronomical.
Definitely.
So I think for me, it would really be checking the integrity of the numbers that have come through the budget. Yeah.
Definitely.
And validate the same.
Definitely. Sandeep, in closing, in less than 30 seconds, I know you're looking forward to tomorrow. It's almost a ceremonial thing for it to happen. It used to be a big deal when you were young. I don't know what's happening, but that public participation is really top right now. What is your expectation, especially on key areas investment by the government? Talk about agriculture, matters to do with food security, in terms of priority of the government and how it spends resources that we collectively give to it as Kenyans. What are you expecting?
So I really do hope, and some of the measures in the budget are, to do with moving a particular tax rate, say for fertilizers. I really do hope that the president, does leave them as they are in terms of zero rating, because they have really added. There's a lot of investment in that agricultural sector. The eco-levy is a big thing. Currently, as worded, it seems like it's applicable on both imported and locally manufactured, products. I'm really hoping that would change, and it should really be possibly for imported, products, finished goods, not really locally manufactured. Because if we do it on both, then we're losing our competitive edge. So there's a lot that I'm hoping, including that motor vehicle circulation tax that you talked about. Administratively, how easy would it be to implement? You can do the 2.5 or the 1% or 0.5%, but would it be easy to implement? What would the government need to do? Remember the third-party evaluations?
Yes.
they would have to be done. Right now, we don't value for third-party insurance, but I would need to then incur an additional cost to value the vehicle. Revenue Authority would need to also invest in a database. They can't just rely on the valuer to then compute that 2.5%. Maybe there are alternates to that as well.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much, Sandeep, for making time
No
to talk to
worries.
KTN News for this. Sandeep Main is a partner tax and head of KPMG Private Enterprise. And he says that he's looking and just measuring how things will go. Remember, we have a bigger conversation coming up on Matters Finance Bill 2024. And it is themed, the devil is in the details. Those details that we've missed. For example, the issue of reimbursement will be actually highlighted right there. We have Diana Gichengo, Executive Director, TISA, Hezbono Molo, Council Member ISPAC, and Ronald Bossi, Group Managing Partner at Ronald's Africa. They'll be having that conversation with Ken Mijungu later on. But right now, let's transition to Business Prime.